Bava Metzia Daf Beis Amud Aleph, a gift from heaven, משלו אוכל שמים. What is our relationship with the environment? At the end of the day, what are our rights, what are our obligations, what is our relationship with the world, with the planet in which we live? The Gemara says, in Brachos L'Hashem haaretz u'mlo, it says the world belongs to Hashem, everything in the world belongs to Hashem, and yet it says, v'haaretz natan livnei Adam, Hashem gave the world to us. And the Gemara says, one is before the bracha, one is after a bracha. Until you've said a bracha, everything belongs to Hashem. That piece of fruit that you're holding in your hand isn't yours, it's Hashem's, and you're not allowed to eat it. Once you've said a bracha, you're allowed to eat it. And I've always wondered, what kind of a kinyan is that? Where do we see such a thing that something is mine, but if you praise me, you can eat it? Where is there such a kinyan? If it's mine, I've got to give it to you, and you've got to do a kinyan. How does the bracha change it from mine to yours, from Hashem's to ours? What is our relationship with the things in this world that we're allowed to use? And by understanding our Gemara according to the way Rashi learns it, and the way the Rambam learns it, and how the Torah resolves it, and the way Tosfos understands our Gemara, again, bringing all our friends, our teachers from those generations into our Beis HaMedrash to teach us how to learn a little piece of Gemara in front of us, we'll gain an understanding into our relationship with the world around us, and that's as part of the process of learning Gemara. All based on the pasuk we've been dealing with two halachot. The one is the rights of an owner of an animal to his animal eating while it works, even if it's working for somebody else. And the other is the right of a worker, of a poel, to eat from the food that he's producing while he's working, and the conditions are all discussed in our Gemaras. Ki tavo b'cherim re'echa v'achalta anavim kenafshecha sav'echa. If you're working in your friend's vineyard, you may eat the grapes to your satisfaction, but you can't take it home. You can't put them in the basket. The issue we're going to be looking at is, so I understand, I'm eating, I'm allowed to eat whatever I can eat. So let's say it's reasonable that during the day I can eat a pound of grapes. So I eat a pound of grapes. What happens if I don't take additional grapes and put them in the basket to take home? But I decide not to eat. The pound of grapes which I'm entitled to eat, I want to take home and give to my family. Am I allowed to do that or not? That's what the Gemara deals with, and that's from which we learn these things. The Gemara asks, the Gemara asks a more fundamental question first. This that the worker is allowed to eat, who gave him that right? Is this a contractual relationship between the farmer and the worker, where there's an implied permission to the worker to eat while he works, and this is contractual? Or is this Shamayim, Hashem gives him the right to do this? This has got nothing to do with the farmer. Whether the farmer wants to or not, it's not given from the farmer. It's Hashem. It's a little bit like we say with the Kohanim when they eat the various things that the Torah gives the Kohanim. Mishulchan gavoha kazachu. They get that from Hashem's table. They don't get that from the owner of the animal that gives them certain pieces of the animal when he brings a korban or when he's makdish something. Here too, this is a gift from God. This is not a part of the payment of the worker. As Rashi says, משלו הוא אוכל תוספת שכר הוא שהוסיפה לו תורה. Does the Torah add wages and say, in addition to your wages, there's an implied understanding that you're allowed to eat while you're working? Or mishel shamayim b'matanat gemilut chasadim kishar matnot aniyim, or is this a gift from heaven, like other acts of chesed and other gifts to aniyim? It's interesting. B'matnat gemilut chasadim, Hashem is doing chesed to the worker. Ask the Gemara, what difference does it actually make? How do you resolve this? We always look for an nafkamina. We look for a practical difference in a philosophic argument. Firstly, because there's no point in having a philosophic argument if there's no practical difference. Who cares? And secondly, because then we can check the halakha and we can resolve the philosophic argument. A situation would be where he says, I'm not eating my pound of grapes, please send them to my wife and let her give them to the family. If you say that it belongs to him contractually, then this pound of grapes is his. He can do what he wants with them, and he can send them home. But if you say Hashem gave it to him, Hashem gave him the grapes. Hashem didn't give the grapes to somebody else. Maya, what is the din? And the Gemara goes on to say, but what difference does it make? If Hashem gave him the grapes, if he's got the grapes, he can still do with it what he wants. Who cares whether Hashem gave him the grapes or the farmer gave him the grapes? The grapes are his. Well, we'll see, not so simple. It says, Rashi, Lididu zachi lerachmana b'tzedakah. This is tzedakah. It's interesting. Rashi uses a different word here from matnat gemilut chasadim. This is tzedakah. B'chol zman de lo mata liyadei lo zachi le. And until he actually gets it into his hand, it's not his. So Rashi understands the Gemara as saying, this man says, I won't take my pound of grapes, please send them to my wife. Explains Rashi in our Gemara, no, this comes from Shamayim, and it's given to you until once you've got them, you can give them to your wife. But what the Gemara is questioning is, can I give them to my wife before I get them? I divert them to my wife instead of me. What is the din then? But the Rambam paskins differently, because according to Rashi, what we've just learned, once I've got it in my hands, then it makes no difference who it comes from. What did we ask? We said, what difference does it make who it comes from? If it comes from Hashem or it comes from the farmer, it's mine. If it's mine, I can give it to whoever I want. No, explains Rashi, you can give it to whoever you want once it's in your hand. But until it's in your hand, you can't give it to anybody, because Hashem just gives you the right to it, but until you've exercised your right, it's not yours. Once you've exercised your right, it is yours. Says the Rambam, Poel she'amar tnu lishti v'ni ma she'ani ochel, o she'amar hareini noten ma'at mizeh shenatalti lechol. I've already exercised my right. I've taken a pound of grapes, and they're mine. Whether it comes from Hashem or it comes from the farmer, doesn't make a difference. Now it's mine. And I want to give half a pound to my wife and children. We don't allow that. His wife and children aren't allowed to eat these grapes. They're not kosher for them. Because this comes from Shamayim and it belongs only to the worker. What is the Rambam saying? Even if he took them, even if he exercised his right, you still can't give them to your wife and children. Why not? They're yours. Okay, it comes from God, but God gave it to you. Just like a Kohen, he's got the right. He can give the gift to his family, to other Kohanim. He can do it. It's not just for him to eat personally. Why here does the poil have to eat it? Nobody else is allowed to eat it. So we see clearly there's a machlokes Rambam and Rashi. That Rashi learns that if he's exercised his rights to the fruit, he can then do with it as he pleases. And the Rambam says, no, even after he's exercised his rights to the fruit, he cannot do with them as he pleases. Only he may eat them. And if he's not eating them, then they belong to the Balabait. They've got to stay where they are. The Tur, you remember the Tur is the most important link in our chain of halakha, the son of the Rosh, who brings all the poskim, the Rambam, the Rif, the Rosh's father, and he brings down the basic foundation of halakha on which the Shulchan Aruch is built. The Tur paskins, he brings this view of the Rambam, he brings the Rambam virtually word for word, and then he asks our question, because he then says, V'yesh omrim, im kvar netalo biyado le'echol yesh lo reshut litno lishto levanav lefi shekvar zacha bo be'atzmo. The Rambam is very difficult. I understand it's a gift from Hashem. Very nice. It comes from Hashem. And I understand, therefore, he can't give it to his wife and children before he's exercised his right, because until he exercises his right, it doesn't belong to him. But surely once he's exercised his right, he can give it to whoever he wants, as Rashi in fact says. What does the Rambam mean he can't do that? Why has he got such a curtailed right? Venire says the Tur. Shafilu hachi, even though it comes from Hashem. And Hashem's given it to him. And he has exercised his right. They're in his hand. You still can't give it to your wife and children. Asking like the Rambam. So the Tur highlights the difference between Rashi and the Rambam and seems to veer towards the view of the Rambam. So again, then what is the halakha? We resolve the halakha. It's Hashem who gives this, who gifts this to the worker. It's not part of his contract. It's not part of his payment. You're working in the field, Hashem gifts you the fruit. Can you divert the fruit to your family? Definitely not. What about when you've exercised your right and it's now in your hand? And the Balabait says, B'tei avon, enjoy the fruit. And he says, thank you very much. Actually, I would like to send some of it home. Says the Balabait, that you can't do. That's the Rambam. Says Rashi, of course we can do it. It's yours already. So we have a machlokes Rashi and Rambam. But where does the Rambam get this from? Why is it that you can't give it to somebody else? Once Hashem has given it to you, I understand it comes from Hashem, it's a gift of God, but still can't you give it to whoever you want? Explains the Beis Yosef. Remember, Beis Yosef is the author of the Shulchan Aruch, who before he writes the Shulchan Aruch, writes this an amazing Perush on the Tur, where he brings all the sources and reasons out. How is the Tur learning the Gemara? And the Tur brings the Rambam and the Rosh, how are they learning the Gemara in order to understand it? So before he writes his Shulchan Aruch, he understands how the Tur learned the Gemara. He doesn't just summarize the Tur, he doesn't just take the bottom line of the Tur. He learns how does the Tur learn the Gemara. And he writes the following. Katav ha-chacham ha-marshim. The Chacham ha-marshim wrote that. The Chacham ha-marshim means the wise man who made notes. Who is this Chacham ha-marshim? I was very intrigued this morning. Who's the Chacham ha-marshim? And it comes very seldom in the Torah, in Beis Yosef. This is the only place we only see it in the Beis Yosef, and we see it very seldom in the Beis Yosef. So this is interesting. Who's the Chacham ha-marshim? So my go-to place to find out who these people are is the Chidah. The Chidah, Chaim Yosef David Azuloi, who wrote prolifically the most amazing things in Mekubal. And one of the things he wrote was a little book which until the time of the internet and all the encyclopedias that were published was our only go-to place to know who's who in the world. It's a little sefer in which he records every sefer and every author written on Torah until his time. So he's got a little paragraph on each one, just a short little paragraph usually. And this is the Chidah, so it's incredibly reliable. Everything he does is researched and checked out. And the Chidah lived in the 19th century, so in the 18th century, so he's early. There's nothing available in terms of academic material. And he lived most of his life in Yerushalayim. He traveled a lot, and he wrote travel logs. In those days when you traveled, you wrote travel logs. Nowadays you do selfies. So we have he didn't write selfies, he wrote travel logs, and we can read his travel logs. He went raising money for the Kehillah in Hebron, for the Kehillah in Yerushalayim. He went around Europe, and he wrote travel logs. So the Chidah, also you remember, I've mentioned to you once before, just to understand it, the Chidah is buried in Har HaMenuchos. How can he be buried in Har HaMenuchos? He died at the beginning of the 19th century, 150 years before Har HaMenuchos was even opened. How is he on Har HaMenuchot? He's on Har HaMenuchot because Rav Nissim, who was the chief rabbi at the time in the 60s, and loved the Chidah, brought his remains back from Italy and buried them on Har HaMenuchos. He gave the job to Reb Mordechai Eliyahu, who later on became a chief rabbi. He was a young man at the time, and he told him, you take care, make sure that he's buried on Har HaMenuchot. And there's a beautiful YouTube that I've referred to you before, where Rav Mordechai Eliyahu explains that when the coffin arrived at the airport, he didn't know how to lay out the bones. He wanted to lay out the skeleton, the bones, the right way, that it should be a proper burial, not just a bundle of bones in a coffin. So he was mispalel, he davened that the Chidah should help him. And he said, you heard the rumbling in the coffin as the bones organized themselves into the body. And that's the way he took it for burial. So you realize who the Chidah was. And the Chidah says, I don't know who this Chacham HaMarshim is. The Beis Yosef writes about it occasionally. It seems that somebody wrote some notes on the side of the Tur, and this is the Chacham HaMarshim, or there was an old manuscript that we don't have, where the Chacham HaMarshim had some comments on the side, but he was an important enough person that the Beis Yosef, one of the Beis Yosef's important roles is curatorship. He tells us who's worth focusing on and who we shouldn't focus on, because there's just too much in the world. The Beis Yosef narrows it down. And for the Beis Yosef to bring the Chacham HaMarshim in is a very interesting thing. What does the Chacham HaMarshim say? Kein nireh sharei zikuy achilato mipnei to'elet ba'al habayit hu. So although the Chidah says he just wrote references on the side of the Tur, he writes an enormous chidush here. He says the reason for the Rambam's view that he cannot give it to his family is because the worker is given the right to eat, not for his own benefit, but for the benefit of the farmer. That the worker shouldn't be worried, shouldn't be hungry, shouldn't start craving things, the worker should feel strong. That this whole din that we have in the Torah of kitavo bekerim reyecha, that's for the benefit of the farmer, an amazing chidush, as we see further on. Says the Beis Yosef, I don't know where he gets this from. Nireh shiramaz lahadetanya in the Yerushalmi. It must be a brisa from the Yerushalmi that we have, where the brisa says, Lo yar'iv ha'po'el v'lo yisagef atzmo mipnei bitul melachto shel ba'al habayit. If you're a worker, make sure you've had a good breakfast. Make sure that you've had a good night's sleep. You owe that to your Ba'al HaBayit. This is an important part of labor law, of working. Everybody wants work-life balance. I want work-life. This is not about you. If you've hired yourself out, your life is not about you. Your life is about the person you're working for. And your life revolves around your work. Otherwise, be your own balabos, start your own business and do what you want. But if you've sold your time, then you've got to understand your sleep is so that you work better. Your eating breakfast in the morning is so that you work better. You get yourself into a position where you're fit for the work that you're doing. It's for the interest of the balabait. But says the Beis Yosef, yes, it's true that the poel, the worker, has to prepare himself for his work. But that's not the reason for this halakha. What happens if he comes to work and his wife has already given him a huge breakfast? Like the breakfast that they used to, the Afrikaans people used to have in South Africa with boerewors and steak and millipap and the whole story. They had this huge breakfast. He comes to work. Is he allowed to eat it? He doesn't need it for his strength. But he looks at the grapes and he thinks that's a nice dessert. No, he's allowed to eat it. And we learned that he's not allowed to eat bread with the grapes in case he eats too many grapes. On the contrary, the halacha should be you must have bread with it. Take a pita with your grapes so that you'll be stronger, you'll have more energy. Says the Beis Yosef, I disagree with the Chacham HaMarshim. The reason for this halacha is not to benefit the employer, but to benefit the employee, to give him the right to eat so that he's not craving the food. However, even putting aside the Chacham HaMarshim who try to give a reason for the Rambam is still right. Says the Beis Yosef, another amazing thing. Where do all these chidushim come from? The Torah gave, it's true, God gave him the rights to this food, but he didn't give it to him as a mandatory right to hold in his hand and now it's mine and I can give it to who I want. It's mine when it's in my mouth. He gave me the right to eat it. He didn't give me the property. He didn't give me the grapes. He gave me the right to eat the grapes. And that right is my right. It's not my wife and children's rights. That's how the Beis Yosef ends. Where does the Beis Yosef get that from? The Vilna Gaon has a little note in our Gemara that says the Torah's source is our Tosfos and not Rashi. So the machlokes that the Torah brings, these two views the Torah brings, is Tosfos and not just the Rambam. The question is, yes, it's good. We've got a machlokes, Rambam and Rashi. And the Torah the Beis Yosef gives a reason for the Rambam which seems to come from nowhere. No, says the Vilna Gaon, it comes from our Tosfos. The Misha'ah shesacharo havikidu hitnayim hu v'im mishel shamayim hu ochel v'loya v'im mishel shamayim hu ochel. If he eats from Hashem, if Hashem is giving him the food, lo yavinu lu shelo zicha lo achatuv ela mashu lo es v'ochel. Hashem only gave him what he chews and swallows. And he can't give this to anybody else. He doesn't have a right to give it away. It's only once it's in his mouth that it's his. When he's holding it in his hands, it's not his yet. Which means that the Torah gave him the right to eat, not the grapes. The grapes belong to the owner. You have a right to eat the grapes, and that right cannot be transferred because it only becomes your right once it's in your mouth. Until then, it isn't. We've got that in the Tosfos. Says the Vilna Gaon, that's the source of the words of the Rambam that the Torah brings. And the Torah seems to be paskening like Tosfos. Tosfos' power in halacha is enormous. We've got to understand how important Tosfos is. Not just important to analyze the Gemara, but it's in the halacha, it's the most important source of halachic reasoning. And in the Ashkenazi schools, we prefer Tosfos. The Rosh prefers Tosfos over people like the Rambam and the Rif, often because the Rambam and the Rif don't reason. They just give us the halakha. Whereas Tosfos works it all out. So we give enormous halachic priority to the Tosfos. And here we see a case where Tosfos in fact does that. And I think that we can expand this principle and understand this. This idea that when Hashem gives us something, He gives it to us. He doesn't give the thing to us ever. He gives us the right to eat it. He gives us the right to use it. That's our relationship with the environment. When it says La Hashem ha'aretzum lo'or, the whole world belongs to Hashem, that's after bracha as well. It always belongs to Hashem. V'ha'aretz natan livnei adam, Hashem gave us the world. He gave us the right to use the world. He never gave us the world. The planet doesn't belong to us. So the only reason to protect the planet is because you believe that Hashem, the planet belongs to Hashem, it doesn't belong to us. So why are we consuming? We have a right to produce using the world, and we have a right to consume that which we produce using the resources of the world. And if you don't have that Hashem at the center of your worldview, then your relationship with the environment is different. Then take what you can, which is like the philosophy you have in Africa, where the Africans feel Africa is so abundant, they don't produce. They just take, they feel they can take because it just reproduces itself and reproduces, and they feel there's a right. Africa has never been productive in that sense. It's never had to be productive because food is so abundant in many, many parts of Africa, but that's not our view. Our view is the world does not belong to us. You cannot take a single thing from the world. You cannot pick a flower. You cannot eat a grain. You cannot eat a fruit from the world. It doesn't belong to you. L'haaretz Hashem umloah. Once you've made a bracha, once you recognize that the world belongs to Hashem, and you understand that Hashem is Melech HaOlam, that's what it is, and you understand that He gave us the right, and it's only a right, it's not ownership, then we're entitled to use the world, to produce with the world, to consume from the world, because Hashem has given us that right in exactly the same way as Hashem has given the po'el, the worker, the right to eat the owner's fruit, but not the right to own it.